I've been wanting to make a platform bed for a while, and we just got a new mattress, so it seemed like the right time to do it. I had a number of requirements, but the most important one was that cats cannot get underneath it. We have 2 cats, and they know to hide when the carrier comes out for going to the vet, so we wanted to eliminate that spot for them to go to. I started out by making the platforms with some absolutely garbage plywood from a big box store. It was marketed as something called sand ply, and I don't recommend it. Just spend the extra $15 a sheet and get something cabinet grade. Because it is such garbage ply, I'm going to edge it in hardwood. And I don't want to hurt my shin if I bump it into the ends, so I'm making a round corner. Now I could have much more easily just trimmed the piece of plywood and then rounded the corner off, but I didn't really like the way that would look, so instead I rounded the corner and then made a round corner to go onto it. Anyway, when you can laser cut your templates, this is actually pretty easy to do. One of my bed requirements is to use up a lot of scrap stuff that's sitting around the shop, and there's a lot of beach left over from last summer's project, so that's why I'm using it for this edge. After all this shaping and cutting, I ended up with these 2 little elbow macaroni looking things that will get glued onto the end of the plywood. But first I have to round the plywood over. I used some double-sided tape to stick the other half of my template on, and then the trim router to get it nice, flush, and perfect. And that is how you solve a problem that only really exists in your own mind. With the pieces for the corners figured out, I went ahead and cut the long, straight pieces for the sides. I probably could have just edge glued these onto the plywood, but I decided to add some dominoes for extra strength. I also used the dominoes to increase the strength of the joint between the corner pieces and the long straights. While the me on the screen is cutting domino slots, let me take a moment to explain why I made the bed the way I did. It's a platform bed because I don't like footboards, they get in the way and they make it hard to put sheets on. And I made it in 2 pieces instead of 1 because I have to get it up the stairs by myself. The width of these panels exceeded the length of my longest clamp, so I had to be a little creative with how I did this. A queen-size mattress is about 60 by 80 inches, so this panel is 60 inches wide. Because my design splits the panel in 2, it's only 40 inches tall. At this point I still needed to put the hardwood on the end of the bed where the feet are, so to be able to slide this piece on over the dominoes in my corner pieces, I cut elongated slots that were open on one side. Because this joint isn't really ever going to be subjected to any kind of pulling forces, just pressure from the top or bottom, I figured this was more than enough. So here you can see how the joint slides together as the piece is clamped onto the plywood. So while I made 2 of these panels, I only really filmed the one that goes at the foot of the bed because it's trimmed on 3 sides and has the rounded corners. The section that goes at the head of the bed has rough plywood on the top and bottom because that's going to be where the joint is in the middle and the part that's against the wall. So you're not supposed to put a mattress directly on any kind of solid surface. This is why box springs exist, and it's to give some ventilation through the mattress. Now our mattress is not a traditional mattress, so I don't know if this is necessary, and I certainly couldn't find any documentation in the manufacturer's details on it that ventilation was required, but I thought better safe than sorry. In full disclaimer, I don't even know if this is an adequate amount of ventilation if it is something that's required. To finish the 2 platform sections off, I rounded over all the slots and did some sanding. The outside of the base is done in oak, and I say just oak because I'm pretty sure it's a mixture of red and white. I had a real limited amount of this oak, so I had to make sure that I was pretty careful with it so I didn't have to go buy any more. So what I'm doing right here is making the corner pieces that will go at the foot of the bed, and I started by cutting 1 long 45, cutting that piece in half, gluing it together, and then cutting that corner piece in half to make 2. There's going to be 6 drawers total in the base of this bed, 4 in the foot section and 2 in the head. I didn't put 4 drawers in the head section because I figured there's going to be bedside tables next to it and those would block any drawer from opening up. And while unbalanced and non-symmetrical designs usually annoy me, in this instance there's probably going to be a blanket hanging in front of it anyway. Not to mention that these drawers will be very literally at foot level. The part I'm working on here is one of the double drawers that go at the foot of the bed. It's basically just a simple face frame for the 2 drawers, which will be inset. I chose to do a continuous grain thing for the cross pieces, which didn't really prove to be the smartest choice. Right here you can see that one end is still open, and that is because that is where the corner piece I made earlier will go. The frames for the head section of the bed are very similar, except because there's only one drawer, there is a solid piece on the side where the other drawer would have been. There's no corner pieces or ways to finish this off because it's just going to terminate at the wall, and the bedside tables will obscure it from view anyway. The interior framework was made up of more of the sand ply that was left over from making the top platform, plus lots of different random pieces of plywood I had left over from projects this year. This piece is the footboard, and it's actually some pre-finished ply that was left over from the curved corner cabinet project, and I put some oak veneer on the other side that will be the one that's exposed. I did the construction with a mixture of pocket screws and dominoes where appropriate, and I tried to have glue as well for every single joint. One of my design requirements was that the bed not creak in any sort of way, and you can probably imagine why. Anyway, I got a little optimistic with some of my pocket hole screw placements and ran into a small problem as you're about to see. I should have known better than to use pocket hole screws right there. Oak is prone to splitting when it's in thin slices like this, and with that grain orientation, it was inevitable. I glued the split back together and redid the joint with dominoes. This did require another creative method for clamping. I didn't have any scraps of plywood at this point that were longer than 48 inches, and I needed about 51, so this is what I did to make the boards long enough. It's probably a bit of overkill, but I don't think there's a problem with making the bed a bit stronger. And these blocks that I nailed on also gave me a little bit easier method of clamping this back part together. Because I had that nice wide piece of oak at the head of the bed, I was able to use pocket hole screws for that joint. Since it was with a double layer of plywood, I went ahead and put screws in on both sides. Time will tell if expansion or contraction has any kind of factor on this joint, but being that it's only 8 inches wide with kiln dried oak, I'm not too worried about it. These pieces will eventually have the drawer slides attached to them, so I had to make sure they were parallel. That's why I used these spacing blocks, which then I moved in and out and eventually became the dividers between the drawers. I couldn't use screws to attach the center divider to that little piece that goes between the two drawers on the lower section, and it would have been very challenging to get dominoes to line up properly. This was my solution. I made these little corner braces to increase the glue surface area. The brads I'm using are really just to hold them in place while the glue dries. I did something similar where all the pieces meet in the middle. The last basic construction I had to do for the base was to add spacers for the drawer slides. These are so the slides will clear the face frame and the drawer will be able to be opened. They're basically the exact same thickness as the face frame reveal. I did not have enough white oak left to make solid drawer faces for all 6 drawers, so I cut thin veneers out of the piece I still had. A lot of this went to veneer that piece of the footboard that I showed earlier, but the rest was used for the drawer faces. I ended up with veneers slightly less than 1/8 of an inch thick, and I cut them all to size. Some of them had to be taped together, and I made a big stack and put it in the vacuum press. PVA glue like Titebond really isn't the ideal thing to use for veneers like this, but I really didn't feel like mixing up any catalyzed glue. After the drawer faces came out of the vacuum bag, I ran them through the drum sander a few times to clean them up. My veneers were a little bit wider than the plywood, so I ran it through the joiner a few times to get a good true edge before I did final dimensioning on the table saw. So that was making the drawer faces. The drawer boxes themselves were made out of scrap 1/2 inch plywood. I don't plan on opening these drawers up too much, so I went with a very down and dirty approach to construct them. The boxes are very solid, but they are not pretty. I had this box of screws that I mistakenly bought like 4 years ago, and it's been getting in my way ever since, so I decided it would be the perfect opportunity to use some of them up. I also didn't worry about edge banding these. I also did the drawer bottoms in about the easiest way I could think of. This isn't pretty, but it's strong enough, and again, they're not going to be opened all that much. I used a small roundover bit for the top edge and a flush trim bit for the bottom where the plywood extended over the edge of the box. Then a little bit of sanding and I thought these drawer boxes were ready for finishing. So it was right about now when I realized I made these drawers too tall to fit in the openings. But luckily that's not too hard to fix. They just needed a little bit of a trim. Of course, after this I had to re-round over that edge and do a little bit more sanding. No big deal. My plan was just to use a clear satin polyurethane for the upper panels, except around the edges. You'll see what I'm going to do with those in a minute, but I taped them off at this point. After the first coat of poly, I did a very light quick sanding because water-based polyurethane raises grain up a little bit, so it's good to do a minor sand in between coats. I'm going to use charcoal Rubio monocoat on the beech hardwood for the edges, but beech doesn't take the Rubio that great. It's pretty blotchy, and I wanted to try something I've been hearing about. So this is a black dye that you mix with alcohol to make the wood as dark as possible before you put your final finish on. You can make it as strong or as light as you want based on the concentration. But I ran into a problem that I totally should have foreseen. It bled like crazy. As you can see, that didn't work at all. There's no real reason why I have to fix this because it's just going to have a mattress on it anyway, but I had to fix it. Alright, with that bit of nonsense figured out, I proceeded with doing all the finishing on everything else. The drawers and the raw plywood edges of the drawer faces got 2 coats of water-based polyurethane. I did the finishing on the backs and edges of the drawer faces before I did final sanding on the front, and that way I'd be able to sand off any poly that seeped through under the tape. This was also a good time to put in the holes for the drawer pulls. I decided to try a new product for the finishing. It's Natura 1 Coat, and it's basically a cheaper alternative to Rubio Monocoat. The Natura mixes and applies exactly the same, and if I didn't know the difference, I'd think I was using Rubio. To be honest, I don't really love the tint that this product had, but that wasn't the product's fault. I should have chose something darker. That aesthetic choice aside, I would definitely use the Natura again. It was about 30% cheaper than Rubio. And with as expensive as hard wax oil finishes are, that is not an insignificant amount. For the drawers, I just used basic 24-inch full extension drawer slides. These were salvaged off a desk we used to have. I temporarily installed the rails on the drawer boxes using the vertical alignment holes so I could adjust them later if I needed to. I used the horizontal adjustment holes when I installed the slides on the bed frame itself. One of the nice things about having full extension slides is because there's still going to be a 4-inch overhang on the platform to make a toe kick, they come out so far that the drawers are still quite usable. This goes quite quick, but right here you can see that the bottom of the drawer box was scraping on the face frame. Luckily, my rail screws were right in the center of the vertical adjustment lines, so I was able to move the box up about 1/8 of an inch and it would no longer scrape. Once I was happy with the drawer adjustment, I put in the permanent screws so nothing would move. Next, it was time to install the drawer faces, so I pre-drilled some holes. I used a deck of playing cards as shims to get the drawer faces properly spaced in a nice even gap within the face frame. Once everything looked good, I screwed the drawer face on from the inside. Next I need to install the pulls, so I finished drilling the holes all the way through the drawer box. Nobody likes a creaky bed, and I went to some extra lengths to make sure that this one wouldn't creak. I used weather stripping to cushion the surface between the drawer base and the platforms that go on top of it. The idea is to prevent any rubbing, creaking, or clicking that might occur between the hard elements of the bed when they're screwed together. The join between the two base pieces was covered with self-adhesive felt for the same reason, as is the seam between the two platform pieces, as well as the edge of the platform piece at the head of the bed where it will touch the wall, and carpet remnants where the bed may touch the baseboard. Getting the mattress into the bedroom was hard enough, which is why I made the bed in pieces. I was able to navigate the staircase quite easily, even though there were two different landings. I clamped the two halves of the base together and then installed several screws. Next I lined up and attached the platform at the head of the bed. I may have gone overkill on screws, but remember, no creaks. The footboard went on next, and I pre-drilled holes where the screws were going to go right into oak. Once everything was screwed together, I put in the drawers for the last time. As you can see, even with that 4-inch overhang, the entirety of the drawer is quite accessible. Aside from wishing I'd used a slightly darker tint finish, and perhaps not the cheapest plywood in the world, this came out really well. It does exactly what it needs to by supporting this monster mattress just right, and when the bedding's on you can't even see it. If you got this far, thanks for watching.